Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you're joining. We're going to wait for a minute here for everybody else to join. I think people are just joining our Zoom call. Welcome to AI Explained, everybody. We have a special guest today. So in the meantime, please let us know what you're looking forward to from today's fireside chat. We're always curious to know what questions you have about generative AI, AI observability, agentic workflows. Okay, so the sign in the virtual background, yes, it's one of our engineers actually made it custom building trust into AI. That's sort of central to our mission at Fiddler. Awesome. So I think we can get started. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us on today's AI Explained. Today's topic is AI security and observability for agentic workflows. Everyone touts that this year is going to be the year of AI agents. Let's see how we need to address these issues. I am your host today. I'm Krishna Gade. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Fiddler AI. Again, please put your questions in your Q&A box at any time during the fireside chat. Today's session will also be recorded and sent to all the attendees after the session. Okay, so without further ado, I want to welcome Karthik Bharati, General Manager for AI Ops and Governance for Amazon SageMaker AI at AWS. Karthik, if you could turn on your camera.
Hey, Krishna.
Thank you. Welcome to Explain. So just a brief bio of Karthik. Karthik is a leader with over 20 years of experience driving innovation in AI and ML. As a general manager for AI Ops and governance for SageMaker AI, Karthik leads the development of cutting-edge generative AI capabilities in Amazon SageMaker AI. Karthik, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe let's start, with your background. How has your role in AI Ops and governance at AWS shaped your perspective on monitoring and securing AI workflows in the enterprises?
Yeah, that's a great question, Krishna. And if I think about how AI ops and governance has evolved over the years, in fact, a lot of the changes has been in tandem with the innovations that we've seen in AI ML over the last few years, starting with traditional ML systems to more recently Gen AI and agentic workflows, as you aptly put. And throughout these years, from what I've seen, there are three things that stand out really. One is security and governance are built into ML workflows from the ground up. It's not an afterthought anymore. What essentially that means is enterprises are thinking about robust data governance techniques, access controls, and how they incorporate audit trails from day one. And effective security isn't about just protecting your models. It's about creating a comprehensive system that includes looking at your monitoring in an automated manner, doing version control, and also having audit trails. The second one I'll call out is the need for end-to-end observability. And this is across both the data and the ML workflows, right from how data is ingested, how you can have lineage starting from all the way to data to ML, and all the way to observability during model deployment to look for drift and so on. And finally, I would call out the third thing is while all these sophisticated tooling is in place, you want to have the necessary human element to sort of oversee the process. While it's automated, there are critical junctures where human oversight is needed, and that helps in the decision-making process.
Awesome. So, being at the helm at SageMaker, you're probably seeing the current state of AI in the enterprise, its adoption. How would you describe it? Could you shed some light for our audience?
Yeah. I think if you look at it again, the last 4 or 5 years, right, the enterprise landscape is evolving pretty rapidly, right? And you can notice several distinct patterns, right? And for what's worth, like we are in the third year of generative AI buzz, right? I think the first year was more around, hey, there's this cool thing, like what can Gen AI do, right? But last year, based on customer conversations, we saw that customer conversation moving from, hey, what is Gen AI to, hey, is this right for me? And how can I adapt this into having a real impact for my business? And this year, we are hearing customers want to go big with generative AI, both in terms of going wide and going deep in, deploying these systems at scale, and also leverage the promise of agentic AI that can create tangible business value, right? And as we see more of these systems being developed, like AI systems, there is a need to integrate these different AI systems so you can orchestrate more complex workflows. And while at the same time, you want to keep in mind aspects of security and reliability. So that's definitely one trend. And the other one I would call out is as you bring in these systems and want to make complex decision making, you want to do so in an automated manner. While keeping in mind, hey, there is transparency and accountability, right? So there is increasingly customers are looking for ways to have human oversight, and they want to scale their AI operations.
That's right. Yeah, especially in the regulated industry which we play in, there is some cautious approach behind, with respect to usage of generative AI or AI agents, like the whole human in the loop. So I guess that begs a question, right? What potential are you seeing for these agentic AI systems? How are they going to transform the business operations? Any real life examples that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think that there are quite a few, right? And let me first break it down into sort of the different patterns we see based on the customer conversations in AWS, and then sort of look at examples for each of those, right? So with agentic AI, and the business value that provides, it fall largely in three different categories. The first one would be using agentic AI to accelerate workplace productivity, right? So think of these as day-to-day repetitive tasks that employees are doing, and they want to automate this and gain the advantage of using such an agentic system, right? A good example is NFL media. They use business agents today to help their producers and editors to accelerate their content production. They have a research tool that allows them to gather insights from video footage from specific plays. And what essentially that provides is when you're onboarding a new hire, it reduces the training time by up to 67%. And when their employees ask questions about what's going on, that can be surfaced in less than 10 minutes of what used to take close to 24 hours. So that's one such example. And more closer to the software world, we are all familiar with coding assistants, and many of you may have already used coding assistants in one shape or the other. And largely, well, they help with building better code or providing documentation or explaining existing code. It's not just about the code itself, but it's more about automating the entire software development lifecycle, including upgrading software or modernizing a legacy application, for example.
Migrating to new languages. Yeah.
Absolutely. So case in point, within Amazon, we had these agents for transforming our code base from an older version of Java to a newer version. And there was savings of, a mammoth like 4,500 developer years worth of effort, right? Roughly translating to, 260 million annual CapEx savings. So that's the first trend, I would think, in terms of using it to accelerate workplace productivity. The second one would be in transforming business workflows and uncovering new insights, right? What I mean by that is as enterprises are adopting agents, they want to streamline their operations and gain insights on their data, right? And the example that comes to mind is of Cognizant. They're using business agents to automate mortgage compliance workflows, and they've seen improvements of more than 50% that reduces errors and rework. Similarly, Moody's is another great example. They've used a multi-agentic system that looks at generating credit risk reports. And again, the benefit is what used to take humans about 1 week to generate a specific report is now cut down to just 1 hour, right? So that's the magnitude of impact that customers are seeing. Finally, the third one I would call out is more in the research area that's sort of fueling, industry transformation and innovation. A good example there is from Genentech. They've deployed an agentic solution running on AWS, and they're improving their drug research process. So what they've done is their solution roughly automates, huge, about 5 years worth of research, right, across different therapeutic areas, right? And then what it does, it helps them speed up the drug target identification and also improve their research efficiency, ultimately leading to faster drug development. So net, we're seeing agentic systems deployed broadly in these 3 categories.
Absolutely. So it's like workplace productivity, business transformations, and then new product innovations, right? So one thing that you mentioned in business transformations, you mentioned a few examples, especially like generating credit reports and claims processing, right? These are high stakes AI use cases. So there is a need for security, transparency into how AI is working. What are some of the challenges that you think our organizations are facing when they're implementing agentic workflows for these use cases, or in general other use cases too?
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, right? So while you're looking at these systems, and I think there are definitely security and visibility challenges that organizations need to look into. I'll call out a few that we have seen, and by no means is this comprehensive, but it sort of comes down to the stage of the ML workflow, if you will, right? And if you think about it at the very beginning, when you're trying to use a specific model, it's quite possible that the data that's being used either to train a model or fine-tune model, use RAG, whatever technique that you use, to use a data that's not authentic, and this might just compromise the performance of the model. That's definitely it's concerning, at the same time harder to detect, but until the model is being used and the interactions that are carrying on. So that's one category. The second would be when the model is being used, and again, it depends on the model. And in the case of a proprietary model, where the model weights are not exposed, it might be an actor trying to attempt to reverse engineer, saying, what are the specific weights that were used at what level, and so on and so forth. And that essentially exposes the how of the model, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And the third one I would think is when the model is actually being used, and there can, actors can attempt to extract information which otherwise the model would not emit. It might be sensitive information about the training data. It might be information that may not be what the model is intended for, or the use case that's being deployed. So net, I think organizations would need to protect against these model weights, have necessary controls around access, ensure that there's data privacy and so on, and more importantly, ensure that there's observability that's end to end. So you're having necessary checks to see how the model is performing, and more often than not, you probably have a sandbox environment where you're testing it, have tooling, there are a few tools like Bedrock Guardrails is an excellent tool. So you sort of incorporate that. Fiddler has an observability tool as well. So these provide sufficient insights into what is going on in the system, being it agentic or an automated workflow, and you sort of take actions based on that.
Absolutely. So I think you touched upon a few things like, adversarial attacks on models. And now there's this whole field of AI security or model security coming up. I remember I think a few weeks ago when DeepSeek launched, everyone was producing benchmarks about how accurate it is or how close it is to accuracy when it comes to closed source models. But it was pretty vulnerable for security attacks. People were able to easily, make it leak PII content and whatnot in RAG workflows. So how do you think about what are some of the best practices that organizations should think about AI security, and what are some of the how do you think about that versus application level security in general that has been around for a while?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you need a comprehensive security approach, right? You want to operate at the different levels. You mentioned about model level security, right? So let's start from there. So when you're thinking about the model, like I mentioned, you want to protect the model weights, right? And in addition to model weights, you want to protect the access to the data, ensuring that the data is authentic and so on. And to address these, you would encrypt where the model is being stored, the actual file, or to your point on adversarial examples, you would have a test environment where you would exercise the model, monitor its output for some of these adversarial examples. And at the end of the day, you need continuous monitoring, right? Just to look at the input and output patterns, but also look for drifts in the model, drifts in the data, and have necessary alerts so you can trigger like a retraining, for example. So that's at the model level. At the application level, I think there are the well-known security practices like you enforce access controls, you have encryption in place, you have logging of the interaction patterns and so on. But in addition to that, tooling is often needed. Like I mentioned, the Bedrock example, Bedrock Guardrails example earlier, you want to think about how you audit certain topics, be it at an input level or the output level, what is relevant to your use case, what should not be emitted, or if there's certain information that's being emitted, like a PII data, how do you redact the information and so on and so forth. So I think net, the two layers of model security and application level security need to integrate seamlessly. So in many ways, these are complementary than treating it as separate concerns.
Awesome. That's great. So I guess, we talked about a little bit about some high stakes use cases, right? So when it comes to, transparency of AI decisions for these, for regulators or business stakeholders, how do you think, this is going to change when, agents come about and, and organizations employ agentic workflows? What happens to the transparency, behind AI?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, enterprise would benefit from having a governance model that's more federated, right? Meaning you have standards, policies in place that sort of dictate how these systems need to be developed across the organization. But at the same time, you want to provide enough flexibility where each team or business unit can adapt these standards in a way that they can implement for their specific use cases. So that's sort of the trade-off, and it's a good one in the sense that you want to provide the flexibility of developing these different systems across different units. And there are, again, tools like, for example, just purely taking an example of SageMaker here, you have SageMaker projects where you can automate the ML workflow, saying how should it be standardized, but what pipelines do you need to use, what models and what quality and so on.
Yeah. So the governance is like both a tools problem as well as a people's problem, right? Like, essentially, many companies do not have the governance structures today, to sort of ensure that, AI is tested, monitored, and securely operated. What are some of the best practices that you have seen in terms of, customers employing AI governance today across, different business units?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, at the highest level of abstraction, you have business stakeholders, like the so-called risk officers, if you will, who understand the domain of what is being developed, and they would enforce certain standards on what needs to be adhered to, right? And it's important that they work in tandem with the technical team who are well-versed with what's being done with the model, right? For example, a model may have a toxic score of like 0.1, but what does that mean is from a use case perspective, whether this model can be approved and deployed in an organization is very specific to the domain they're operating in. I think successful organizations have a good mix of both, where you have the necessary tooling, where these different levels, for example, toxicity is being monitored for, they're being documented either through a model card, or you have enough properties, maybe in a model registry, for example. And this translates into visibility from the risk officer, who can effectively say whether this model or the system is approved for deployment or not. So the two systems working together, I think definitely is a recipe for success.
Got it. So are there any specific metrics that you recommend that organizations need to track, like whether it's about security or, governance of AI, when they're testing it, or, when deploying to production?
Yeah. So if you look at the metrics, again, at the technical level, you have a set of metrics, right? At the most foundation level, if you have to document what the model is doing as a model card, you would look at the purpose of the model, what data it's trained on, what is the validation rules, what is the quality of the model, and so on. And going a little bit beyond that, you may want to document how the model is emitting or predicting a response, right? So, for example, with you may want to look at explainability approaches, like you may look at a SHAP score, for example, or you may look at a Lime score, for example, and these may be documented with the model. That those are good metrics to look at. And again, with Gen AI, you can look at additional metrics around toxicity, fairness, and so on. You can test these models. You can have periodic evaluations on the level of these metrics and test it against standardized data sets that are available today, or you can use custom data sets that are very specific to your use case. And then again, at the business level, you want to interpret these as saying, with a combination of these objective metrics, how does the subjective standards and policies play in, and what does that mean from a risk perspective?
So there is always this tension within the organizations to adopt AI faster versus doing it right? So there is this, like, how do you make sure you do it properly so that you don't get into trouble? Like how should, like, organizations think about, like, this balance?
Yeah, I think that's a key one, right? I think there's no one easy answer, if you will, right? And the key to balance robustness in having those security controls with the operational efficiency lies in having the right guardrails, right? Instead of creating or looking at the problem as saying, hey, here's one way to do it, or one set of, hey, this is risky versus non-risky, you're probably looking at a set of a range of values, if you will, right? In terms of how you look at risk. A good example would be, let's say you have the model or the system deployed, and you notice that certain changes introduce a higher risk. It's better to trigger additional approval workflows rather than just waiting on it and saying, here's a single way to do it. In contrast, if the same set of changes result in a relatively lower risk, you may want to proceed through standardized approvals instead of requiring additional approvals. a good example again would be, let's say there's a drift in the model, right, which is fairly common, and you have an observability solution in place. If the drift is not significant from the current state of the model, you may be okay with treating that as an alert and being in the know-how of what is being happened, and you may just trigger a retraining of the workflow. But on the other hand, if the drift is significant and it exceeds what is the threshold that you defined, you may trigger additional approvals, or in some extreme cases, you might even consider rolling back to the previous version. So those are different options that you can consider. And the key is to maintain that configurable so you can trade off between the rigor and the robustness of security control with the efficiency that it comes up.
Right. So when it comes to evaluation of AI, right? So in the past, for classical machine learning, you could do things like ROC curve, AUC scores, precision recall, and maybe even do like sharp plots and understand the feature importance. But now with generative AI and agentic workflows, evaluating the performance is not straightforward, right? There's no ground truth. So how do you can you shed some light on like how customers are going about this, in sort of in sectors that you have been exposed to so far, and what are some of the best practices?
Yeah, I think the ones that I've seen, or the areas where customers are exploring, are evaluating the system end to end, right? There's no one unique metric. Like going back to the example that mentioned earlier, concretely, you can think of having a pipeline that triggers on either manually or on a periodic way, and that evaluates the model on certain dimensions, right? And evaluation is sort of a broad topic, but if there are certain aspects of the model that you want, like let's say, be it fairness or robust toxicity, for example, like you can look at evaluating, for example, a model against a Toxygen model and seeing, hey, if these inputs were sent to the model, what is the output? And once you know the expected output and the actual output, you can actually see the difference and say, okay, the model is working on expected lines, therefore this is the score that you want to assign for that particular category, right? So developing that comprehensive pipelining workflow and making sure you have observability in each of the places, and saying, as a system, you do it first at the model level, and then you do it at the system level when there are multiple models interacting with each other, and then saying, given the behavior of the system, what is the sort of the score that you want to? In some cases, you can be creative in creating a composite score. It purely depends on how much weight that you assign to each of these individual score to create this composite score, and how you gauge that composite score with respect to your use case.
Yeah, especially for agentic workflows, when in some cases when they are automating the decision process, right, in the enterprise space, there is a need to measure like whether the decisions are optimal or not. And it's a pretty hard problem. Any thoughts on that? Like, for example, this, take the example that you mentioned, like the claims processing workflow, right? Like which was probably like much more manual in the past. Now it's like automated. How can customers measure like if it's working properly and if it's actually working optimally for the business?
Yeah, while you can have objective metrics, at the end of the day, it's the business use case, right? And I think it would involve human processes overseeing the sort of outputs from the system. And I think the key is to have the necessary hooks in place, right? For example, while on one end you want to enforce controls on like what data is being accessed or what output is being generated, or like what toxicity is the scoring or the evaluation of the model is being done, you want to make sure there's human inside, and every decision, especially in the early phases of when the system is deployed, you want to have these human evaluation on the system output. More importantly, you also want to have some sort of a pause switch, if you will, to say that if the model deviates from the known patterns, what is the way to quickly have the humans come in and have this pause switch, or even a kill switch for that matter, to make sure that corrective actions can be taken.
Yeah, and so I think basically, this might change from industry to industry, right? So, like for example, what you want to measure or what you want to control around AI can be different for different domains. Have you seen any sort of insights, like for example, finance versus healthcare versus like some other industries, like what they may care about in terms of the measuring and putting security controls?
Yeah, it's more than the industry. I think, like you call out, it also depends on what set of policies and standards they're adhering to. And then, yes, it goes by also the regions in which they are, like the
Mm.
EU Act or the ISO 42001, the different regulations that come in.
Yeah.
Um, so there's no one size fits all, but the more effective use cases that I've seen, or the ones that have been deployed successfully, factor in both the subjectiveness of the standards that require you to adhere to certain things, like, hey, where the data is stored, and sort of answer the different questions related to the standard, along with the objectiveness of the metrics that's being tracked. So the more successful use cases, and they do vary across like the healthcare and financial services. And even in the case of retail, there are examples where a combination of the two is needed.
Great, great. So what are some of the warning signs that one can like actually see that an agentic system may have security vulnerabilities or monitoring gaps? Like how can an organization be aware of that?
Yeah, I think the first one to look for um, is the data quality, right? You want to make
Mm.
sure you know the model data input and the model what it's trained on is secure and robust. That's important. And once you have those in place, I think you want to have an effective testing strategy to ensure that you defend against adversarial attacks. So there's even if, for example, there's a manipulation in the input, you want to make sure that the security of the model and the system is taken care of. And then the one that we talked about on model drift and looking for any degradations in performance. So continuously monitoring and looking for those key parameters is important. And from the system application standpoint, you want to ensure that the API endpoints are secured. Again, data transmission is secure, and so on and so forth. And you have robust controls for both the authentication and authorization piece. At the end of the day, I would think of it as an employee, right? An employee badges in, and the employee in many organizations badges out of the building as well. And the next time you come in, you badge in again. So you sort of re-authenticate and make sure that you are aware of like this person who is authorized to do this particular job. It's very similar to an agentic system. So you want to ensure that another one that comes to mind is the principle of least privilege, right? You provide access only when that's needed, right? And very similar again to the employee example that I called out. An employee may not have access to all data, but when it's needed, you sort of ensure that, hey, the person who really needs that information has access to it. So those would be some signs to look for when you're designing security.
Got it. So there's an audience question here. So any specific frameworks, tools you're using for agentic workflows to evaluate robustness and accuracy? This is probably a good time to talk about our partnership between SageMaker and Fiddler. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like we're thrilled to be working with Fiddler. And at the outset, partnership is something that's absolutely critical for AWS and SageMaker specifically. As we look at extending the core AI/ML capabilities and to provide specialized solutions for different industry needs, I think partnering with a company like Fiddler is absolutely paramount. And what the intent is really simple, right? We want to make sure the best of class solutions are available to our customers, right? So with Fiddler, we've combined the power of SageMaker AI, where you can train and deploy your models, with Fiddler AI, which brings in observability to monitor and improve the ML models. So net customers have a one-click way to do observability with SageMaker AI. And this experience is available in SageMaker Unified Studio. It provides a seamless experience, and I'm pretty excited about how customers can use these two capabilities in a seamless manner.
Absolutely. Yeah, we share the same excitement. And for those of you who are on AWS SageMaker today on this call, feel free to use the one-click experience and one-click integration that we built together with working with AWS with Fiddler for monitoring and evaluation of your AI models. So let's actually, maybe take a few more audience questions here. There are some questions around different industries. There's a question actually about code migration. We touched upon it early in the call. What are some of the best practices for verifying large code changes or migrating from one language to another? This is, I think, using AI-based code migration.
Yeah. I think the specifics actually depend on the language itself, right? Depending on whether you're looking at a more modern language or like a traditional language like COBOL, for example, right? So I think given that, while the migration is being assisted, you want to look for patterns of like translation between the two systems. Sometimes the logic may be inherently complex, so there's human in the loop, there's assisted AI that comes into play. You should definitely try out some of the tooling that's already available with Amazon Q. We recently launched at reInvent the ability to look at the system workflow end to end, and there are obviously pieces around security that's very specific to the organization as well. So in terms of best practices, I believe there's also a detailed documentation. We can find a way to share that with you on what's need to looked at as you do these migrations.
Absolutely. And so there's another question on like specific industry. Could you shed some lights on business use cases within financial services or FinOps, and plus where AI observability makes sense?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few. The top 2 or 3 that come to mind are the automated financial reporting that I called out. I mentioned about Moody's use case about generating credit reports, or Cognizant's use case about mortgage compliance workflows. Demand forecasting is another one. It's sort of relevant in the context of financial services as well. And more generally, I would say incident management that applies across different industries is also relevant as you look at more data and you want to uncover insights from that data.
Got it. And then another question from the insurance industry, beyond models, what recommendation of metrics would you have? For instance, for claims processing, can you explain specific measures you suggested to clients and share what your assessment is on the quality improvements of business outcomes?
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not from the insurance industry, so I would mind commenting on that. That said, I'm happy to take that question back and come back if we have the contact information. I don't represent the insurance industry, so I just don't want to give out the wrong answer.
So Priya, feel free to reach out to Karthik on further information. Awesome. So I guess finally, as we sort of get into the last few minutes of the podcast, right? So what are some of the things like maybe like sort of a life cycle workflow when organizations are thinking about, because life is moving very fast in the last few years. You were talking about ML, and all of a sudden there's generative AI. Now there's AI agents. Like when an organization is thinking about it, how do they go about it? Implementing these things. What should be the priority? What should they be the best practices?
Yeah, I think the playbook, if you will, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly there are a few common things across these different systems, and I'm sure there will be a lot more coming in the next few years. But fundamentally, I think what has not changed is starting with data, right? I can't emphasize this enough that the better your data is, the better pretty much your AI model, agentic system, all of the goodness that's out there. So have a robust data infrastructure, quality data that feeds into your machine learning processes. And if you're starting off with Gen AI and agentic system, I would start with one high value use case, prototype it to your business problem, demonstrate the value quickly, and taking it to the next level, you want to establish the necessary MLOps foundations, saying how does monitoring play into the system? What does versioning mean? How can I go from one version to the other? These are fundamental as you think about taking a system from just a POC to a production. These play in, and just building on that, and very relevant to the topic of today is looking at the governance frameworks. What does it mean to have a simple approval workflow that needs to be set up as you're scaling through the system? And a lot of this also requires that you invest in your own team and train them so they are aware of the different elements of taking or going live with these different systems in place. Just with AWS, there are enough training and certification. I'm sure Fiddler has their training and certification available. So those help you build your internal expertise. And finally, plan for scale, right? What worked for you when you started off with a small system may not be applicable when you go for like a 10x or 100x of what you intend to build. But the goodness is there are enough enterprise features at AWS, SageMaker, in Fiddler that help you scale as you go through this journey. In converse, what you want to avoid is rushing through a system quickly to demonstrate value, not having a good data or like a data quality approach, not engaging a lot of stakeholders, and then you have very little insight into how you would do maintenance or upgrade or deployment. So that is a recipe for failure. So as long as you avoid that and focus on the fundamentals.
Or more colloquially, don't do vibe checking. Vibe checking and vibe testing of your models. And actually know what you're doing. That's a great point. So I guess actually it's a very related question someone is asking. Things are moving really fast, even for us in the technology area, right? Like, what type of problems in 2 to 3 years within AI agents that will keep you up at night? What do you foresee in the future?
So that's there's so much I could predict, but see here, that's a question, I ask myself every day, right? Fundamentally, I go back to, back when I joined AWS many years ago. There was this interesting quote by Jeff that still resonates with me. It's something around, hey, what will not change, as opposed to saying, hey, what will change? That part, the second part, what will change is sort of, each of us can debate like for hours or days together. But what does not change is fundamentally customers asking for better value, and what it translates to something that's more performant, something that's robust, something that's secure. Those fundamentals are not going to change, or something that's cheaper, right? Like the way Bezos put it, no one's going to come to you and say, hey, give me something that's more expensive or so slower to perform, right? So fundamentally looking at the system and seeing what value it adds to your business use case, what does it translate to your customers? I think those would be paramount as you look at these innovations that are happening in Gen AI.
Yeah. And there's an innovation happening across like small and big players, right? So there's there's a question around how small, there are a lot of new AI agentic applications that are coming up, and how do you think like they're playing within the the big big players in the ecosystem, building agentic workflows. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
how AWS might be encouraging on the ecosystem side as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one is definitely through the partners. We work closely with companies like Fiddler. I think the second dimension to that question is AWS providing the choice to the customers, right? So there is not a single model that we say, hey, this is what you need to do. That's something that you as customer can decide, right from DeepSeek to the latest Llama models to our own in-house Amazon Nova models. You have all of those available to experiment and try for your use case. I'm sure a lot of it will be applicable even in the world tomorrow, where you have the choice in choosing the best of what's applicable for you.
Yeah, awesome. Great. I think with that, we are coming to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Karthik, for spending time with us today. I think one of the things that I took away is that quote that you mentioned that Jeff said, like, what is not going to change? And I believe what is not going to change with AI is going to be whether it's your simple statistical model or deep learning model or generative AI or AI agents. You need to test it properly, you need to monitor it properly, and you need to make sure it's it's secure and it's working for your business. So And so I think that's not going to change. So I think that's kind of where our partnership with Amazon comes in. And so thank you so much for being on the show today, and look forward to further more conversations in the future.
Thank you for having me, Krishna. It was great chatting with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.